You hear me, Manny? Is it working? Okay. How's everybody doing today?
Wonderful.
Good. Good. We'll wait for everybody to filter through. There's still kids coming from outside.
I'm still laughing about what Bobby said. There's no new timers here, but just old timers.
Yeah, well, when I think of old timers, I typically think of me. Okay, well, maybe most of the kids have filtered through. So I'll open us up in prayer, and then we'll get started. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the day you've given us. We thank you for loving us, providing for us, and just giving us a church that we can come and fellowship together and worship you. God, I pray as we open the Bible today that you'd open our hearts and our minds, help us to learn what you'd have us learn, and take it to the world outside so that we can reach souls outside for you. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. Hope everybody had a good week. So today we're going into Revelation 17. Just as a quick review, we looked at chapter 16 last week, which was the bowl judgments. They're literal, chronological, and cumulative. We need to remember that. And that these bowl judgments parallel the judgments that happened in Egypt before the Exodus. First bowl was loathsome sores. And those may fulfill Deuteronomy 28 bowl judgments, maybe a fulfillment of that. We saw the second bowl, the sea turned to blood. We also noted last week that the bowl judgments tend to mirror the trumpet judgments on some level, so that was a mirroring of the second trumpet. The third bowl was the rivers and springs turned to blood, also parallels what happened in the Exodus. And the fourth bowl was scorching heat. The sun's heat intensified. People blaspheme God rather than repent. We see that as a theme throughout the book of Revelation, is people, instead of repenting, they just continue to blaspheme God. And that was also similar to the fourth trumpet, which was, in the fourth trumpet, it was the darkening of the sun. And this one is the scorching of the sun. Yeah, Bobby?
You said that was the fourth, it's the fifth.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say the fifth. Sometimes I mistype. And then the fifth bowl was darkness on the beast's kingdom. We saw darkness fall on the world. The sixth bowl, the Euphrates River dried up in preparation for the War of Armageddon. And the seventh bowl, we see that it was done, and we saw these massive hailstones, 100 pounders at a minimum, maybe 135 pounds. So you can imagine the damage that was done. And in spite of that, humanity continued to curse God and blaspheme God. So that's the last of the judgments. So now you're wondering, well, gee whiz, there's more chapters in Revelation, so what's going on? Well, chapters 16 and 17 is dealing with Babylon. So the city of Babylon is mentioned 300 times in the Bible, over 300 times. 260 references in the Old Testament, 42 in the New Testament. I don't know if you know this, but with the exception of Jerusalem, Babylon, the city, is mentioned more times in the Bible than any other city. So in the book of Revelation, there are 404 verses. Of those verses, 42 verses refer to Babylon. And we're going to see, and now not necessarily Babylon by name, but we're going to see, for example, here in chapters 17 and 18, it all deals with Babylon. So all these verses go together to comprise 42 verses out of the 400 verses in in Revelation. So basically 1 out of every 10 verses in the book of Revelation deals with Babylon. So do you think God has something to say about Babylon? He does, right? God has something to say about Babylon, and we're going to see that. So I mentioned earlier, Babylon is a source of so many of the heathen and pagan religions, which have opposed the faith of Israel as well as the faith of the church. In fact, almost all of the false religions, the occultic practices, and agnostic practices we see today, when we trace them back to the Genesis, we find them rooted in the ancient religions of Babylon. Genesis 11, 1 through 11, shows us that right after the flood, Babylon was the seat of civilization that expressed open hostility towards God, or organized hostility towards God. And Babylon is also associated with the persecution of God's people, both the church today and Israel. So in chapters 17 and 18, we're going to see God's judgment, final judgment of Babylon after her rebellion against him. So I just want to say something about the chronology. Chapters 17 and 18 do not fall chronologically within the scheme of the seals, the trumpets, or the bowl judgments of the wrath of God. Chapters 17 and 18 are part of a broader theme or broader narrative of the 7-year tribulation. So just as Genesis 1 describes the creation, Genesis 2 is a broader narrative of creation, specifically regarding Adam. Genesis 17 and 18 should be viewed the same way. So 17 and 18 is just a narrative of the actual judgment of Babylon. That's why it's not in the chronology. In general, chapter 17, we see Babylon, we see its religious character. And that religious character climax in a world religion which seems to fit the first half of the last 7 years, or the first half of the 7-year tribulation. So chapter 17 records the destruction of Babylon by the 10 kings. So that's 17. So if Babylon is destroyed, what do we do about 18? So chapter 17 deals with spiritual Babylon. Chapter 18 is going to deal with political Babylon. Babylon is not destroyed twice. It's just the two different views of the destruction of Babylon. One from the spiritual and one from the political. So mostly Babylon, most of the 290 verses, or 290 times Babylon is mentioned in the Bible, it's in reference to the political power of the city of Babylon. So when we see Babylon mentioned in the Bible, mostly it's about political Babylon. Fewer references are to the spiritual Babylon. So chapter 17, we're going to deal with spiritual Babylon. Chapter 18, we're going to deal with political Babylon. So moving on, once again, these are not two different judgments. They're just different accounts of the judgment from two different perspectives, spiritual and political. So there is debate, and you've probably heard this, about whether Babylon mentioned in 17 and 18 is it literal or is it figurative? Have some of you heard that it's just a figurative Babylon? And most people think it's figurative because you see the term mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation here in chapter 17. So some people have said, well, it must be a figurative Babylon, right? So there's some debate about that. Is it figurative or is it literal? I think it's literal, and I believe these chapters refer to the literal ancient city of Babylon. Now you may wonder, well, it's not there right now. And we're going to talk about that more in chapter 18. Babylon is located about 55 miles south of Babylon along the Euphrates River in Iraq. Baghdad, 55 miles south of Baghdad along the Euphrates River in Iraq. It is prophesied in the Bible that Babylon will be destroyed and never occupied again. I don't know if you know this, but Babylon has never not been occupied. Yep, there's always been people there. You see these excavations done in Babylon in the 1800s and early 1900s. The people that are doing those excavations are hiring local labor. So it doesn't have the prominence now that it did but it has never not been inhabited. Isaiah 13:20 says it will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation. Nor will the Arabians pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds there. And then Jeremiah 50:39 says, therefore the wild desert beast shall dwell there with the jackals, and the ostriches shall dwell in it. It shall be inhabited no more forever, nor shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. These verses speak of a total destruction of Babylon, where it will never be inhabited. So Babylon has never not been inhabited. That's why I think it's a literal city that the Bible is talking about when it speaks of Babylon in 17 and 18. And if you know your history, or your Bible history, you'll know that when Cyrus the Great, the leader of the Persian Empire, when he defeated Babylon and conquered it, he conquered it without a shot. In fact, you can find ancient writings where he brags about the fact that he conquered Babylon without a shot. Babylon was never destroyed. In fact, when Alexander the Great went through, he made it one of his regional capitals. Babylon was never destroyed. It just ceased from being prominent. So, Isaiah 13:20 and Jeremiah 50:39, those are prophecies that have gone unfulfilled. And we know God keeps his promises, right? So that promise will be fulfilled someday. And I believe the day that it is fulfilled, we'll see here in Revelation 17 and 18. So what does that mean for Babylon? It means it will once again rise as a city of major political and religious importance. And that's why I believe it's the literal city. Now, I don't know if you guys have followed Dubai. Like from the 80s, if you look at pictures of Dubai, it's like one little teeny street and there's like nothing there. And have you seen pictures of Dubai lately? Huge skyscrapers. It's mega industrial city. Maybe not industrial, but it's a very large population center, important city in the Middle East. That grew pretty quickly. So the fact that Babylon is not important today doesn't mean it won't be again in the future. In fact, if you know any of your history of Saddam Hussein, he started re-glorifying the city back in the 80s and in the 90s. And I read an article as I was preparing for this, and hopefully I'll bring some of this up as we look at the political city next week. I saw an article where the UN has been considering moving its headquarters to Babylon. In fact, there's been a huge investment in laying fiber optics in the old city of Babylon. So the powers that be, whoever they are, have an interest in restoring Babylon, which is why I think it's a literal city once again. So before we get into chapter 17, let's spend a few minutes reviewing spiritual Babylon. Will somebody read Genesis 10, 8 through 10? Yes.
Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of the kingdom was Babel. Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar.
I was wondering who was going to get those words. So notice the words before. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Right? I think it says that twice. It says Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. The word before literally means that which turns. It has a wide variety of uses and can be translated as facing, before, in front of, or against. Those are the uses we see. In this particular case, the word before is actually against. That's the correct translation here, according to the context. So, he was a mighty hunter against the Lord, is how it should be read. I'm sorry?
My commentary here says it suggests great arrogance.
Yes, suggests great arrogance. So he's a mighty hunter against the Lord. He was a mighty hunter in the sense of fighting against him. If you're a warrior, you do not turn your back to your enemy. You face him, and he faces you. That's the understanding of the proper understanding of this text. So against is a translation here. He was a mighty hunter against the Lord. Nimrod was against God. He was facing the Lord in battle, in antagonism, rather than in submission. And that is what is shown by the context here. If you look at his conquest, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. He conquered Babel. He conquered Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. What he was doing here was probably bringing city-states under his control and forming them into one nation. Now, if you remember, after the flood, what did God tell man to do? Disperse. Nimrod did this in defiance of God. So, since we're looking at spiritual Babylon today, all forms of occultic practices had their origins with Nimrod in Babylon. And you can see that in Isaiah 47 if you decide to look at that. But what do we know about the religion of Nimrod? Tammuz, the son of Nimrod, and his queen Semiramis was identified with the Babylonian sun god and worshipped through following the winter solstice, December 22 through 28, or 22nd to 23rd. So that's where we get our Christmas from. Catholic Church has converted that period of time to Christmas. I think it's interesting if you look at the history of all these pagan religions that have been brought into Christianity. So that's an interesting study. But after the Babylonians took over, or after the Persians took over Babylonia, or Babylon in 539 BC, they actually discouraged the continuation of these Babylonian mystery religions. So as a result of that, the Babylonian cultists moved to Pergamum, or Pergamus. So if you remember the letter to Pergamus, what does it say about Pergamum? It says it's the seat of Satan. So these Babylonian cultists ended up in Pergamum. We see that in Revelation, the letter to Pergamum in Revelation 2. So when the teachers of the Babylonian mystery religions later moved from Pergamum, they eventually moved to Rome, where they were influential in paganizing Christianity and were the source of so many so-called religious rites which have crept into ritualistic churches. Babylon has since become the symbol of apostasy and blasphemous substitution of idol worship for the worship of God in Christ. So as Christianity was established as the official state religion of Rome, many of the religious traditions and practices of the earlier pagan worship were adapted and incorporated into the state religion of Christianity. And that's where we get many of our occult practices today enveloped into Christianity. So the Babylonians' worship of Ishtar and the golden egg of Astartes, and the fertility rites of spring give us Easter. It's why you see rabbits and eggs together. We know rabbits don't lay eggs, but it comes from the Babylonian mystery religions. The occultic religions have given us Halloween, and that's related to the worship of Baal. So chapter 17 deals with Babylon's final judgment because of all these false religions. We're going to see the great harlot here in chapter 17. We'll see that she rides the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and she is the mother of harlots and abominations, and she is drunk with the blood of the saints. So here's a big read. Will someone please read Revelation 17, 1 through 6, as we actually get into the chapter?
Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of those of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of the sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written the name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Judah.
And does it say, and when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement? Did you read that? I must have missed it if you read that. Okay. Well, that's okay. So chapters, in verses 1 through 2, one of the 7 angels who had one of the 7 bowls invited John to witness the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. So John was invited to watch this, and that's how we get chapter 17. The evil woman symbolizes the religious system of Babylon, and the waters, what do we know about the waters? Anybody remember from earlier studies? Can anybody reckon a guess here? Waters typically symbolize people, multitudes, nations, and languages. And we're going to see that again in verse 15. But that's what the waters are: peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So Babylon is called a harlot 4 times in this chapter, and called a great city 8 times. So this woman, the harlot, receives more attention than any other symbol in the book of Revelation. She is surrounded by more identifying clues than any other symbol in the book. There's no question about who this harlot is. So in verse 2, the angel informed John that the kings of the earth had committed adultery with this woman. In other words, they'd become part of the religious system which she symbolized. And we see this in Revelation 14:8. We see that identified in Revelation 14:8. And verse 8 says, and another angel followed, saying, "Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all the nations drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." So Chuck Misser is somebody I like, and I've got some of his commentaries. He made a good point. Lennon once made a statement, and he said that religion is the opiate of the masses, or of the people. Have you guys heard that before? Religion is the opiate of the people. So the phrase drunk with wine is interesting, as religion is man's attempt to cover himself with God. The control by state religion is one of the most dangerous trends in history, and it's in view here in Revelation 17. In fact, it's even in view in modern day too, in modernity. If you look at how paganism is pushed in our schools today, it's scary. Paganism is pushed every day in our lives. Schools today are shredding the fabric of our heritage and destroying the character of our nation. They do it by omission, by not teaching our nation's true history. And they do it by commission, by teaching outright lies through historical revisionism. In verses 3 through 5, John was taken in the Spirit to a desert where he saw the woman himself. She was sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names. And as we saw before, this beast, who is this beast? You guys remember? This beast is the Antichrist. So she is carried by the Antichrist. The Antichrist uses this harlot, this false religion, for his purposes. The beast had 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast is obviously a reference to the world government that we see in Revelation 13. The 10 horns will later be defined in Revelation 17:12 as 10 kings who had not yet received their kingdoms. And the 7 heads seem to refer to prominent rulers of the yet future Roman Empire. So according to Walvoord, her position, the harlot, that of riding the beast, indicates on the one hand that she is supported by the political power of the beast, and on the other hand, she is in a dominant role and at least outwardly controls and dictates the directions of the beast. So this world religion seems to be in control, at least temporarily. Any questions so far? Any ideas? I don't want to stand up here and just lecture. What's that? Okay, well, the harlot's association with blasphemy and the dragon's beast are clearly seen from God's perspective. But to the people on earth, she will look quite religious and have the faith that everybody seems to want. She's going to be the big thing. This woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. So her adornment is similar to that of the religious trappings of ritualistic churches today. So if you think about it, it's interesting today that so many churches have these fancy raiments that they wear. You see it on TV. And I don't want to just point out the Catholic Church, but you see it within the Catholic Church. They wear a lot of purple and red. I think their bishops wear red, and you see a lot of that. I think it's interesting that we see so much of that in the Catholic Church. And I want to say that many people find the connection between religious Babylon and Roman Catholicism irresistible. You see it all the time. People want to say they're one and the same. But I think it's a flawed connection in a sense in that there's no doubt that religious Babylon will incorporate a strong Roman Catholic element, but it will be much bigger than the Catholic Church. I think the Catholic Church will be dwarfed by what's going on.
Chris, isn't verse 8 talking about the Roman Empire, the beast that thou sawest was and is not?
Yeah, it is. And we'll get there. But you're right. It is. But I think it's a flawed connection. And as I said earlier, I don't think the Catholic Church or Catholicism will be the one world religion, nor the Pope its false prophet. The reason I think that is at the second half of the Great Tribulation, the religious system is thrown off. So I don't believe it's the Pope that becomes the leader of that. I think it's interesting, though, to see the various remnants of religious leaders, like I said, particularly within the Catholic Church, how that remnant has played a part in the past, the present, and the future in denoting some kind of holiness. Because we see all those remnants and we think, gosh, that's holy. We see the liturgical value of those and think it's a holy organization. White, purple, gold, while purple, gold, scarlet, precious stones, and pearls can all represent beauty and glory in relation with the true faith, they have a false religion that prostitutes the truth. In fact, when you watch it on TV and you see them all dressed in gold and red, automatically as Christians, our first thought is to think, oh my gosh, really? I mean, maybe that's just me. But
and you see that in the depictions of Buddhism as well.
In what?
Buddhism,
Buddhism?
they have real fancy raiment for those that are in charge.
You're right.
Those that are like North Korea, their religious system is pompous with great
Right.
looks and stuff. So
You see it all over.
all over the place.
And I think as we have a negative response to that as true believers, I believe the saints will also have a negative response to that, but the rest of the world will grab onto that. This,
You wonder why they follow that when it's destined to be a bad thing, but it talks about how they get away with it is they're drunk with the wine of her fornication.
mhm.
Drunk with it, they have no bearing of what's right or wrong.
Yeah, it's the influence that God, because the Holy Spirit will be there during that period of time. I think it's the Holy Spirit that leads the believers of the day to recognize the deception, just like He does today. But the rest of the world won't have that, to have it pointed out to them. I think the saints, like I said, the saints will recognize that her character and life are symbolic of false religion. But I believe the believers will recognize there's nothing more than a prostitute of the truth. So in her hand, she holds a golden cup filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries, the wine of her adulteries. And this is confirmed by the words written on her forehead: mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abomination of the earth. Excuse me, guys. So in verse 6, we see that she is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And John says when he saw her, he was marveled with great amazement. So this woman not only persecutes, but she also revels in her persecution of the godly. As in drunk.
What do you think he's meaning when, in the latter part of verse 6, he says, I wondered with great admiration?
Well, I think it's just a...
Kind of an awe?
Yeah, well, I think one, that's a translation, the word they chose to use. In mine, in another one, it says, I marveled with great amazement instead of admiration. So I think it's just the translations it's used. But he's obviously seeing this and he's amazed by what he sees.
I see that as amazement of, I don't believe this.
Right, yeah. We can be amazed in a lot of ways, right? We can be amazed in awe and think how great, or we can be amazed in, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I think that's more of what's going on. This makes it clear that the apostate religious system of the first half of the 7 years leading up to Christ's second coming will be completely devoid of any true Christians. So we'll sometimes speak in condemnation of the Catholic Church, but I do believe that there are true believers within the Catholic Church. Right? But I think it's clear that in this system, which is why we might say it's not the Catholic Church, is because in this system it will be completely devoid of Christians or believers. In fact, the apostate church here will attempt to kill those who follow the truth, right? John expressed this great astonishment at this revelation. It makes me think of 2 Timothy 3:1-5. That says, but know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away. I've said it before, just as in the tribulation, people think they are going to be doing good by killing the saints. And I believe that the church is going to suffer that similar fate.
Isn't that what Saul did? He thought he was doing the right thing?
Yeah, he thought he was doing the right thing. And I've seen it firsthand. I mentioned last week about the church that somebody posted on Facebook about how they disagreed with it, and they got attacked by other Christians for disagreeing with a open and affirming church. And I think the mainstream church, it will eventually call a true Bible-believing churches out for being unloving towards those who the truth condemns. They have been. And it's not that we're being unloving, we're just pointing out the truth, but they see that as unloving.
Actually, we're being more loving by
Right.
pointing out the truth.
That's true. We are being loving by pointing out the truth. Because unless you know the truth, you don't know what you're doing is untruthful. So I believe that the Bible-believing churches and those who faithfully attend will see persecution in our day by the fake mainstream media churches who think they are doing God's will by condemning us for our stand on the truth. We see that today. So in John 6, John marveled with great amazement. John was amazed because this wasn't pagan persecution, such as he knew in his day, but religious error and persecution. The church of that first century was persecuted by pagan religions. The church and the saints are going to be persecuted by the appearance of a Christian church. According to Walvard, it says, this is a pseudo-church, thirsty for the blood of the saints. False religion is always the worst enemy of true religion.
It goes back to Satan copies everything God does.
Yes,
So God put together a church. Satan's going to do the same thing.
right? The church that we have today, what did Christ say? That the gates of hell shall not prevail. And technically a better translation of that is that the gates of hell will not withstand the church, is a better translation. So the church created by God was to beat down Satan. So it makes perfect sense that this church that Satan, this religion that Satan is going to produce, would do just what the church has done to it for 2,000 years. Is it will attack true believers. So I did a series. Let's see if I sometimes put little blurbs, and I didn't have a lot of. So we went hunting yesterday, and my son got an antelope, which was good, but it took a lot of the day, so I didn't have a lot of chance to research this or to review my lesson. And sometimes when I'm writing my lessons, I'll just put one little sentence. It's like, oh yeah, because I want to talk about this. But when you don't review it, it's like, now why did I put that sentence in there? I don't remember. But I'm going to try here. So it says, maybe I'll remember. It says, I did a series on the history of the church where we went into detail about the persecution of, okay, you know what? I was bringing up, we did a history of the church, right? I don't know if you guys remember that. This was probably 3 years ago. And we talked about a trail of blood as part of the research of that was the history of the Catholic Church, some of those denominations. And what's interesting is as we did that study on the history of the church, we saw that the Catholic Church killed more true believers in its history than even false religions have done. So we've seen that pattern in the past. It shouldn't be a surprise to us that we're going to see that pattern in the future. So moving on to verses 7 and 8. Would somebody like to read those?
astonished. I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come.
So here we see the angel explaining the meaning of the woman and of the beast she was riding. It says the beast will come up out of the abyss. So we know the abyss is the home of Satan from Revelation 11:7, and the place from which the demons come from Revelation 9. So the focus on the description is the beast. And it also appears that the woman will ride this beast. The ruler will use the harlot, and he will use the religious system just like tyrants in the past have always used it. It's historical knowledge that tyrants always seem to use religion. The beast carrying the woman relates to the beast introduced in Revelation 13:3. It says the power behind the beast, the Antichrist who carries this woman, is Satan. And it says that the supernatural survival and revival of both the world ruler and his empire, and it will impress the world as being supernatural and will lead to the worship of the beast and Satan. So I'm kind of going outside of the lines here, but it's something I saw which I didn't incorporate in my lesson. But if you look at the history of Rome, so Rome wasn't defeated, it just kind of broke up. But you realize that in history, every one of those pieces has made a run at world leadership. Portugal, Spain, England, Italy tried it again, Germany. They've all run or made an attempt to be a world leader. So all those pieces of Rome have risen again, but they've never done it. They've tried, but they've never succeeded in taking over the world. England probably came the closest. You guys have heard the saying that the sun never sets on the English Empire, because they had such vast holdings all over the world that everywhere in the world the sun was always shining somewhere on an English possession. They probably came the closest. But people, the pieces of ancient Rome have tried on their own parts individually, but they've never succeeded. We're going to see this coming world leader, rising out of the Roman Empire. He will succeed, at least for a short period of time. So, let's see if I can get back to where I was. I was coloring out of the lines. Okay, Revelation 9 through 11. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7 and going to perdition. So here the angel informed John this call for a mind of wisdom, a mind with wisdom. The truth is that the truth of what is being presented here symbolic requires spiritual insight to be understood. The difficulty of correct interpretation is illustrated by the various ways it has been interpreted by church history. So, the angel informed John that the beast's heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. So, can you guys think of a city that has 7 hills? Okay, so there's the crux. Many people want to say that this is Rome, which is why this is Mystery Babylon. Well, so let's see how well you remember your history, or at least imagery in the Bible. What else can a hill stand for, or a mountain stand for? A kingdom. Kingdoms and nations. So, many ancient writers, such as Victorinus, I've brought up Victorinus before, the first commentary we have on the book of Revelation. He wrote on his commentary that this identifies the 7 hills as Rome, which is often described as the city of seven hills. So this identification has led to the conclusion that this passage teaches that Rome will be the capital of the coming world empire. But here's the issue. Originally, Rome had 7 small mountains along the Tiber River, and the hills were given names: Palatine, Avertine, Caelian, Equiline, Viminal, Quirimul, and Capitoline. Later, however, the city expanded to include the hills Jacomum, Janiculum, and a hill called Panician. So Rome is no longer, a city of 7 hills. So Rome is often referred to as having 7 hills or mountains. Turns out it has more. Historically, it's always looked at 7 because we look at Rome as, well, it's obviously the city at the time of Christ. No, it gained more mountains, more hills. So while Rome is often referred to as having 7 hills or mountains, different writers do not necessarily... I won't even talk about that because I don't remember why I wrote that. So a close study of the passage does not support the conclusion that this refers to the city of Rome. Seiss, for instance, offers extensive evidence that the reference is to rulers rather than to physical mountains. And if you look at it as rulers, then the description makes sense. In the Bible, mountains are sometimes referred to as, or sometimes a figure of government. And we see that in Daniel 2. And the city of Rome is built on hills, not mountains. And a view that this is not the city of Rome is supported by the text in verse 10, which explains they are also 7 kings. So they're hills, but they're also kings. It is probably better to see the 7 mountains as representing the 7 kings and kingdoms described here in Revelation 17:10. If the mountains represent kings, then obviously they are not literal mountains or hills and are not a reference to literal Rome, but a reference to people or kings. This view is also supported by verse 10 when it says 5 have fallen. We don't have mountains or hills that fall. It says 5 have fallen. One is, the other is not yet to come. But when he does come, he must remain for a while. So John was writing from his point of view in which 5 prominent kings of the Roman Empire have already come and gone. One was then on the throne. The 6th, which was probably Domitian, who caused persecution and put John on the island of Patmos. The identity of the 7th king, the one who was to come after John's time, is unknown. I mean, you could probably do the research and find out who that was. But verse 11 adds that the final world empire will be headed by an 8th king. And this 8th king is the beast, who once was and is not, and now is not. Belongs to the 7th and is going to his destruction. So we see that in verse 11. So the 8th king would be the final world ruler. The man who heads up the final world empire destroyed by Christ at his second coming. It should be said that the Roman Empire split. So you guys know from your history on the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, the thighs were Rome, and he has the image had 2 thighs. And if you know your history of Rome, you know that Rome was never conquered. It split into 2 kingdoms. You had an eastern leg and you had a western leg, right? So Rome split. And of course, the capital of the western leg was Rome. Does anybody remember the capital of the eastern leg? Byzantium, which became Constantinople and Istanbul, and we keep changing the names, but that is the capital of the eastern leg. So when we think of this revived Roman Empire, because we think of Western, we think of Rome, we sometimes picture this coming world leader as being European. We have no reason to believe he's European, because we have an eastern leg. It's probably someone from the Middle East. And there's other reasons to believe that, and I won't go into detail because I didn't research it, but it talks about the coming world leader comes from those that conquered Rome or conquered Jerusalem. Well, if you know anything about Rome, they conscripted most of their men from the territories they conquered. And they had conquered the Middle East, so the people to come would be probably Middle Eastern. So this Antichrist, this world leader, will probably be Middle Eastern and not European. Okay. Talks about it? Okay. Okay, very well. So he's more likely to be Middle Eastern. So we need to get out of our minds that we're looking for some European leader to step up. It'll probably be Middle Eastern. Another possible explanation of the difference between the seventh and eighth beast is that the seventh beast itself is the Roman Empire miraculously revived in the end time, and the eighth beast is its final ruler. That's the miraculous. It dies, and then it comes back. So we know it's coming from the former Roman Empire, just the eastern leg, not the western, will be the leader. So these verses show that in the end time, particularly during the first half of the last 7 years, there will be an alliance between the Middle East ruler, the Antichrist, and the apostate world church at the time. This will come to head, however, at the midpoint, or the 3.5 years, when the political power becomes worldwide and he no longer needs this false religion. And that will be pushed aside. So we have Revelation. Let's move on to, we're running out of time. Revelation 12 through 14, it says, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom yet, but they have received authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. So verse 12 explains that the 10 horns are 10 kings. 10 kings who have not received their kingdom yet. And this probably alludes to a 10-nation confederation, as the toes that we see in the Daniel 2 image that Nebuchadnezzar, right. Toes are mixed with miry clay, so iron and clay. Many commentators have tried to identify the 10 successive kings in the past. The passage itself indicates that they are contemporaneous kings. So some Bible or some commentators who write on Revelation will say, well, these are just kings from the past. You know, the Medo-Persian, the Greeks, Alexander the Great. They try to make allusions that those toes are those ancient kings. No, they're contemporaneous to the day. These are 10 kings that will exist at that period of time. Let's see. Verse 13 declares that they are all of one mind and will give their power to the beast. So whatever their exact identity is, their actions are clear. They unite and join with the Antichrist in war against Christ in the battle alluded to in the 6th and 7th bowls, which is the Armageddon. So their antagonism to Christ is indicated throughout the entire 7 years. And when Christ returns, these 10 kings will make war against him, but will be defeated. I think it's kind of interesting, the hubris, to think you can make war against God. But that seems to be the heart of the Antichrist, is hubris. Verses 15 to 18, I'll read because we need to get through it. It says, and he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. So that speaks of at 3.5 years, religious system is destroyed. This is where the religious system of Babylon is destroyed. For God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his purposes, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So God uses the beast to destroy spiritual Babylon, this spiritual one-world religion. So as mentioned earlier, these waters are interpreted as peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The harlot's influence is worldwide, through her connection to the beast. And this will be a truly one-world religion. This will be a one ecumenical world religious system, embracing all languages and nations. I don't know how that's going to work, because you've got so many different religions that are so opposed to many others. I don't know how he'll accomplish that, but that's what makes him the beast, right? Speaking marvelous things, and he can do a lot. So the interpretation of the harlot focuses on her relationship to the beast. She is utterly connected to the beast and his government. And remember, throughout history, religion, not true Christianity, has often been the willing servant and supporter of tyrants.
Have you ever thought that maybe the one thing that unites all these different religions is ecumenical? Ecumenicalism?
Well, yeah, ecumenicalism just like means bringing all into one.
Speaking in tongues and doing all that.
Well, you know what? There's going to be Christian elements that are in. They won't be true Christians, but they'll, I'm sure, bring in, because you figure there's a lot of people that grew up in the church who know the truth, but they've chosen to put it aside. So in this period of time, you figure it's going to be a tough period of time, and they're going to say, oh, you know, I used to go to church, and they try to fall back on that, and they're going to find this and see elements of Christianity and think, oh, good, here I am. Here we go, I'm back in it. Everything's going to be better. So it'll have elements of everything, I'm sure.
That prosperity gospel.
Prosperity gospel, that's right. Let's see. Chapter 16 and 17. This chapter closes with the dramatic destruction of the woman. I'm not going to go into all of my notes because we're out of time. Let's see. Anything I want to pull out that might have some value to us? So this is all part of God's sovereign plan to use the beast to destroy the spiritual Babylon. And we see it all throughout history that God uses people, even evil leaders, to bring his plan to fruition. We saw it with Joseph. What does Joseph say to his brothers? You meant it for evil, God meant it for good. One thing we have to take from all of this is that God, even though all this is happening, is God is using that for his purpose. And we can take comfort in knowing that anything that's going on in your life, God is using it for that purpose, to sanctify you and make you pure and holy before him. And to glorify himself, even through all the bad things that you might be experiencing. So the reference to this woman as a city is another link with ancient Babylon, this time regarded as a religious center for false religions. The apostate church represented by the woman was a combination of religious and political power. And then next week, we're going to get into political Babylon. And so we might talk some about how Babylon is currently being rebuilt, and how someday in the future it's going to be a city of major political importance. So we will see Isaiah and Jeremiah fulfilled, and that city will be completely destroyed as well next week. That's all I have. Any questions? Hopefully this lesson had some value for you. Okay. Jeff, do you mind closing us in prayer?